Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strangeness of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unseen Paranormal for Season 5 premiere. I am happy to be back. It was a nice break, and I think it's good to take breaks every once in a while and just get your shit together. I don't want to ever get burnt out with the podcast, like I was telling y'all before I took a break. So the break was very nice, but also been very busy at the same time. I have not let off the gas. Just wasn't doing the podcast. Me and Austin have been filming a lot of stuff for some new documentaries that we're going to bring out, paranormal documentaries for Strangely Haunted. So if you haven't subscribed to that, go over to the YouTube page and on Facebook, Strangely Haunted. And also, if you haven't seen yet, we bought a 200-year-old historic haunted house in Hopkinsville, Kentucky that we've been working on to get ready to rent out for paranormal teams. And also, we're going to do some historical tours and things like that. So stay tuned for all those events, and you can check out the website and keep up to date with the house. It is thenightHouseKY.com, and that is the Night House is KNIGHT. And also you can find the Night House on Facebook to keep up with daily progress. But coming up here soon, we will have a schedule up on the website where you can book your own paranormal investigation and come and have some fun and meet me in person and hang out. And, yeah, all that good stuff. The house is amazing. We're going to talk about it in a future episode, but all the history and the hauntings and things. We've had things going there since we bought it day one. Now we're like 3 months in and just had things happen yesterday. So anyway, glad to be back. Been very busy, like I said, but got some awesome guests lined up for you for season 5. I'm so excited about this. I had to reignite my passion for the podcast. Just to let y'all know, I had a few moments there while I was on break that I thought, do I really want to bring the podcast back or not? But I know y'all are enjoying it, and that makes me very happy. And once I jump back into doing interviews, I'm like, oh yeah, this is why I enjoy it. I enjoy talking to all these different people, and it kind of renewed my excitement for the podcast as well. So, and also all of y'all's comments, whenever you text me or send me a message on Facebook or even your reviews, those things, they keep me going. So please keep that going as well. Reviews are important as well for other people to find the podcast. So if you can, rate and review on Amazon, on Spotify and Apple, and then on Amazon, if you follow on any of the podcatchers that you use to listen to the show, I'd really, really appreciate it. It helps other people find the show. And, if you're enjoying it, then, please share the show too with all your friends and family. I put up posts every week on Facebook advertising that week's episode. And if you see an episode that your friends and family would like, then please do share. Please share it out. It definitely helps, continue the show. The show's not free. So the more people that listen, the more we can do with the show and the more places I get to go to come, into your town, maybe to a convention or something and see y'all in person and do some live shows and things. But anyway, it's not all about money. The show will always be free. Don't worry about that. So anyway, I think that's all the housekeeping, but I'm happy to be back. It is great to bring y'all some more great guests. And today we have a phenomenal guest to kick off season 5. We are talking to Jim Harold, and Jim Harold is the OG of podcasting in the paranormal world. He had his first show is called The Paranormal Podcast. So that tells you anything. And he has another show that's hugely popular as well called Jim Harold's Campfire. And on today's show, we were talking about his latest book in the Campfire series. It is book number 6. And he takes all these listener stories and compiles them into books. And so it's firsthand accounts from his listeners. And maybe even some of y'all out there, maybe you listen to the show. Maybe you've put some stories into Jim's podcast. But Jim Harold, he was a pleasure to talk to. He was actually an influence on me to start this podcast. And because I wanted to talk to people like he did, and very, very sweet guy and very humble. And we had a great conversation. He tells some great stories and just a good time. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of The Unseen Paranormal with Mr. Jim Harold. And we'll talk to you next time. Have a good day. Stay safe out there. Hey, Jim, thanks for coming on the show today and joining us on the Unseen Paranormal.
Hey, thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it. Always glad to connect with podcasters I've not had the opportunity to talk with yet, and glad to speak with you and your audience today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk spooky stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely my pleasure. I've been listening to the Paranormal podcast for I don't know how many years now, and for
Thank you.
anybody that's not familiar with you, you pretty much have the godfather of paranormal podcast, the Paranormal podcast. That's been going on for many years, and then you started Jim Harold's Campfire, which is hugely popular as well. I don't know why anybody who's listened to this show wouldn't be familiar with what you do, but
it's very possible. The thing is that I'm always amazed. I mean, there's so many people out there learning about podcasts all the time. So you got to constantly reintroduce yourself. There's plenty of people that have no idea who I am, and that's okay. I'm glad to meet them, and I hope they check out the shows and the book.
Yeah, you were one of my inspirations for starting a podcast. With hearing and you talking to all the different people in the paranormal, I kind of thought I want to do that. Like being a paranormal investigator for 20 something years, I have been, and like, okay, let's take this to a different level and kind of talk to people and learn more through other investigators and authors and things like that. So I appreciate you doing the podcast because of that. And not saying that I do what you do in any way, shape, or form, but because you're definitely a professional and have amazing quality. But that gives me something to aspire to, I guess.
Well, I think that, there's room for everybody. The way I look at it is, and I was talking with Dave Schrader from the Paranormal 60, formerly of Darkness Radio, a while ago, and he made the point, and I think it's a good one. Everyone's got their own little spin. I may ask a different question than you or Dave, and you might ask a different question than me. We all have a different perspective. So we're not really doing the same thing per se, because I can't be you. You can't be me. I can't be Dave. The idea is to just be the best version of yourself and bring your personal perspective to it. So I think there's room for everybody. And that's why I've always tried to be very welcoming to other podcasters. I think this is a huge mystery, and one person is not going to solve it. It needs all of us working together to learn more about what's really going on. So glad to have you and all the other podcasters out there talking about this subject.
Yeah. I preach the same thing on the show all the time about, it takes all of us. It's a all inclusive group, and we're all the same type of weirdos.
That's right. And I'm proud to be one.
Me too. So you just had your 6th edition of True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire, come out, and up to volume 6. And you have a show called Jim Harold's Campfire.
Yep.
And that is where listeners can submit stories.
Yeah, that was my second podcast I started. That was in 2009. We just celebrated our 15th anniversary of that show. And at this point, every week we have a 90-minute show where people call in and share their supernatural stories. Now, the book is a little bit of misleading, the title, because it says True Ghost Stories, and it is True Ghost Stories, but there's other subjects in there as well. And basically, every week we have 9-10 callers call in and tell their stories. It could be ghosts, it could be cryptid creatures, it could be time slips, it could be UFOs, but a lot of ghost stories, obviously. And then what we do for the books is we go through, a couple of years and we say, what are the absolute favorite stories? And we kind of work together, me and my folks that work with me, and we come together on some stories. And this one has 65 stories in it, and I actually believe it is the best one we've done yet. And they run the gamut from the terrifying to the heartwarming, because I do think the paranormal is like a continuum.
Yeah.
I don't think it's all terrifying, and I don't think it's all sweetness and light. I think it's like everyday life. There's good, bad, happy, sad. And we try to get that across in the books. And of the ones, you don't have to read them in any certain order. This is the 6th book, and I think this is by far the best one. Is just my bias.
Yeah, and I love the books. I've read the first couple. I haven't got to dive into this one yet, but I've read the first few, and I love the mix of stories. Like you were saying, it's not just ghost stories, but it's a really good mix of kind of a pie slice of the paranormal in general, of all the different topics and different people's views on their experiences and things like that as well.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
And I love books like this as well to get the story straight from the people who it happened to.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to dismiss stories unless you hear it straight from the person, because I think you get more context from that person, and you get kind of the atmosphere, and you can kind of hear their voice and say, okay, well, you know, I kind of believe them more, because you know the paranormal in general is kind of subjective, especially when you have personal experiences.
Well, the thing is with the books, what we try to do is we literally take the transcript, the verbatim transcript, and then we edit it as lightly as possible to make it flow. You know, it's a Q&A on the show, obviously, and I'm asking questions. We kind of take me out of it.
Yeah.
So if I said, you know, that had to be terrifying for you, and they say, yes, it's terrifying, you know, just take me out and say it was terrifying, you know, but we really very lightly edit it for, you know, flow and just to take me out of it. But we don't really change any of the content. You know, if somebody mentions a red car in the story, in the book, it's going to be a red car. We don't change the stories. We try to keep their voice as much as we can. So really what you're reading is a pretty accurate representation of what they said. We don't add stuff. You know, we pick stories that we don't feel that we have to make it scarier.
Right.
Because the ones that are scary. And so we just let it stand on its own merits. And a lot of times, you know, the stories are kind of open-ended. You know, in other words, what did that person experience? Well, we don't know. And it's kind of like it is in real life, you know, everyday life. You talk to somebody, tells you a real story. And a lot of times the answer is, well, what was it? Or what did it mean?
Yeah.
And a lot of times there's a big question mark at the end. And it reflects that.
Yeah. And in my 20-some years of doing the paranormal, I've always found that when you think you've answered one question, it opens the door to 1,000 others in the paranormal.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always kind of open-ended that way. And that's why we all continue to do what we're doing, to try to figure out those answers.
Yeah, that's something people have asked me. They said, you know, what have you learned in almost 20 years of doing these podcasts? And I'll say, you know, I haven't figured it out. I mean, I do believe more so than ever that things are really going on, that there's a lot to a lot of these stories. But what the explanation is, I'm more confused than ever. You know, when I first started out, I was a kid growing up. I watched In Search Of, I watched in Unsolved Mysteries, read the books, you know, all of that. And I have very definite ideas. You know, ghost is a dead person. Right. UFO is an alien. Bigfoot is an animal. And now, after all these years of doing it, is there something to all of those things? I think so. I definitely, you know, in the case of ghosts and UFOs, I'm absolutely a believer. Bigfoot, I'm a little bit on the fence. I go back and forth. But the point is that I thought I had it all figured out before I started, and now I realize how much I didn't have it figured out, that this is far more mysterious, and who knows exactly what's going on, but I'm convinced that there definitely is something. And I find, you know, the vast majority of people I talk to on Jim Harold's Campfire, that podcast, I think they're being very sincere in what they're sharing.
Yeah. I kind of, when I started, especially with the podcast, because my forte has always been ghost and hauntings and investigating those things. So I kind of box myself in as just like a ghost person, ghost guy. You know, I'm a ghost investigator. And now the longer I've done the podcast, the more I realize, like you're saying, that it's all connected in some way, and that you can't just box yourself in as an investigator or researcher, or even as a podcaster. If you're going to dive into the stuff, you kind of got to touch on, because at first there was a lot of things that I was like, you know, I don't want to get into UFOs too much because it's too much like conjecture and tinfoil hat type stuff. But finding the right guest to talk about it is kind of the key. And putting it all together. Yeah. And like Bigfoot and things like that, well-informed, well-opinionated people who have done their research. Yeah. And so, yeah, my views have changed as well. And I'm glad you went there, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, how it's going to change your views on the paranormal. But yeah, and also things like, you know, with time slips, I think, okay, well, you know, sometimes a haunting may just be a time slip, or maybe Bigfoot, you know, is a time slip. We don't go up and poke a bear in the butt in the woods to make sure it's real, right? You know, so if you see a Bigfoot out in the woods,
that's a good point.
Yeah, so kind of changing. Time slips is a thing that I've been fascinated with for a long time as well. What are some of your favorite stories that you like to put in the books that just kind of capture your attention?
The ones that get me are the head scratchers. And probably I'll give you, if you've got some time here, I'll give you maybe the biggest head scratcher we've ever had on the show. And it's not in
Yeah.
this book. I think it's in the third book. And it's called The Roadhouse Saloon. And the kind of neat thing about this is, I think this storyteller told this story back in 2012. It's my favorite all time story. I got to meet her in person right before the pandemic in 2019. And after meeting her, I believe her story even more. So I'll share it with you. Her name's T.I., and she's from Michigan. And she was, her and her family would go up to, like, I guess, a camp every summer up in Wisconsin. And, spend some time. And her and a friend went to a bar one night to see a band play. They wanted to see this particular band play, and her friend's name was Bob. So T.I. and Bob went up to this bar about an hour away from the camp, and they went and saw this band play. And they actually closed down the place. She stayed the whole time, and Bob, and they were actually musicians, so they went in the back and talked to the band. So they left around 3:00 in the morning. So they had to drive back to camp about an hour away, 2-lane roads, very dark, rural part of the world. Anybody that's been in the rural areas knows, it's not like the city. When it's dark, it's dark. It's like pitch black dark.
Yeah.
So anyway, they're driving, picture them driving down this 2-lane road in the middle of the night, kind of spooky anyway. And T.I. tells Bob, hey, I kind of got to go to the restroom. And Bob says, well, and he kind of looks around and he says, pull up a bush if you want me to pull over, but that's about the only thing you've got. And she said, no, just drive fast. So anyway, they get down the road a little bit, and like an oasis, there's this bar that's open. In fact, the joint appears to be jumping. The lights are on, neon lights are on, cars are in the parking lot. You can hear the thump, 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 thump of the bass of the music. And they're kind of like, hey, this shouldn't be, but let's not look a gift horse in the mouth. Let's pull in. So anyway, Bob pulls in and he says, I'm really glad I came here because, in addition to being a musician, he's a painter, an artist. And he knew that they had a mural there that people talked about, an Old West mural. And he was glad to be able to finally check it out. So anyway, they go in, T.I. goes to the restroom, Bob goes to the bar and gets them both, I'm assuming at that point, a soft drink. And they come back and they're talking, and all the people are kind of just like vacantly smiling, and they're just kind of weird. So this guy goes to the jukebox, and it's old Wurlitzer jukebox, the bubbler type.
Yeah.
And he puts on a song, Let's Twist Again by Chubby Checker. And then after he does that, he walks back and he asks T.I. if she would like to dance. And he smiles, and he has a mouthful of rotten teeth. And T.I. said, and T.I. had a cane, and she held it up because she used a cane. She said, I don't dance much. And she said that's one time she's really glad she had that cane. So it was really just kind of a strange vibe in the place. And they started looking at this mural that I told you about. And they noticed that everybody in the mural was represented as real people in the bar. There was a woman standing by the bar, and it was the same woman in the painting, except she was dressed up as what they used to call a dance hall girl. Yeah. There were a couple of guys playing pool, but in the mural, the same couple of guys were playing cards, but they were dressed like an Old West. And it was multiple people, but everybody in the mural was actually a customer. They're like, boy, that's weird. And they got to talking and said, well, no, there's a perfect explanation for this. These people are regulars, and whoever the artist was just included them in this as like kind of a tribute, kind of a Easter egg.
Yeah.
So they kept talking. The weird vibe continued. And they looked at the mural again, and it had an area with swinging doors, like in the old TV Westerns, the sheriff would come in and say, I want to see Bart, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, but they noticed something they didn't notice before. There were two like misty, like columns almost. One was shorter, one was taller. I thought that was weird. I said, you didn't notice that to Bob before? No, I didn't notice it. They talk a little more. They look back, and it gets even stranger because these columns start to like solidify or like come into focus, like a Polaroid picture, an old school Polaroid picture. You know, you would take the picture and you have to wave it so it would. So anyway, it looks like there's a shorter human figure and a taller human figure, and they keep talking, and they look back, and then now it's developed into a man and a woman. And T.I. noticed the woman has curly hair and T.I. has curly hair. And the male figure is much taller. Bob is much taller than her. Then they look back and she notices that the female figure in the doorway there, in those doors, have boots. T.I. has cowboy boots on. They talk a little more and they notice that the woman figure has a cane. Of course, T.I. has a cane.
Yeah.
So they were essentially developing into the picture. At that point, Bob and T.I. look at each other and say, let's get that out of here. So they start to head out, and the people are like, come back, come back, come back. They close the door. T.I. says everything went pitch black. Absolutely pitch black. All the neon signs were out. It was like the place was never open once they closed that door. And they turned around to the parking lot that had been full of cars. Now it's full of one car, their car. They get in the car and they leave. And you would think that's a pretty wild story.
Yeah.
But the story's not over. T.I. is braver than I am. A couple nights later, I think it's with her sister. I'm not sure if it was her sister or her friend. They went back, and T.I. said, we're going to see what this is all about. And this is the one concession she made was she went earlier. She went about 8 o'clock at night. She didn't wait till 3 o'clock in the morning. She walks in, same mural is on the wall, but there's nobody standing in those swinging doors, but everything else is the same on the mural. She goes over and looks at the jukebox. Well, the funny thing is, it's not a bubbler jukebox, an old Wurlitzer jukebox, but it's a modern of the time CD jukebox. And, oh, by the way, no chubby checker anywhere to be found among the selections. She goes to the bar. There's a woman tending bar, and she's talking to her. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. I said, I was in here the other night, T.I. said, and there was this big burly dude, kind of good looking, young, kind of farm boy looking guy. And the woman's tending bar. And T.I. said, the woman said, the bartender said, no, that can't be. The only two people that bartend here are me and my elderly father. And with that, T.I. decided to leave. Now, for many years, she did not return, but I think she finally did return and check out the Roadhouse again. And that place actually exists. I have a picture. In fact, we have a YouTube video that T.I. retells her story. I went and visited with her in 2019, and we recorded that. And we have an actual picture of the mural. Place really exists. And I got to tell you, Eric, I believed her when she called in back in 2012. I believed her even more once I saw her face to face. So how do you explain that? That's not a ghost story. What is that?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is, but I believe it's real. And I do think it kind of hints at the fact, I think our existence is way stranger than we realize. It's a lot more multifaceted than we realize. And I think that sometimes we get a glimpse into it. And and I think that's what happened to T.I. What it was, I don't know, but I believe it's true.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Is it like you're saying, what is it? Is it a interdimensional slip? Is it a time slip? Is it ghost? Is it, just kind of keep you scratching your head. And the fact that she went back there, like there's follow-up, because a lot of these stories, you don't get that follow-up. Like you were saying, you don't get any kind of satisfaction of that. But yeah, the fact that she went back there and to check the place out, it's pretty incredible.
Yep. It is very incredible. And again, she, I believe she's retired now, but a very respected profession, kind of a pillar of the community kind of situation. So again, very credible person, very believable person.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people out there that don't have anything to gain telling these stories, especially with some of them being really crazy and out there. Like that one is almost unbelievable. But like you said, she's very credible. But yeah, a lot of these people have a lot to lose and not a lot to gain.
That's very true. Yeah, then that's the thing. I mean, it's not like, I have a moderately successful podcast, but I'm not Joe Rogan. They really have nothing, folks have nothing to gain other than to share their story. They want to share their story. They want to maybe get it off their chest. Maybe they haven't told anybody ever.
Right.
Maybe they want to share it with other people and hope that it helps them. And I do think that happens. We get reports of that all the time where people say, I thought I was the only one, and yet I heard it on the campfire that other people have experienced this. So, I really think the vast majority of people we talk to are giving it to us straight.
Yeah. How many people do you have that want to remain anonymous?
Very rarely. Usually we just use people's first name on occasion. I would say a few times a year, somebody will say, I want to use a pseudonym, and which I'm glad to do. We don't use last names as a matter of practice.
Yeah.
But typically most people have no problem giving their real first name. And if they don't want to, that's no sweat. I totally get it. And we're glad to use a pseudonym if they give us a pseudonym they want to use, or if they don't want their location. We usually, unless they specify it, we usually keep it in the States here to the state. If they specify, if they're from Philadelphia or Chicago or wherever it is, we'll mention it if they put it in the comments. But otherwise, we keep it kind of vague.
Yeah. And in the 15 years you've been doing the campfire stories, have you found that it's easier to get people to tell you stories now versus 15 years ago?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, we always seem to, in fact, it's funny you mention it because we do it through a sign up. So people sign up and then we coordinate with them for taping time, because the show, when you hear the 9 or 10 calls per show, they're not necessarily recorded on the same day. We just kind of record them and then we kind of put them together. I kind of liken it to putting together a model railroad. So we don't do that particular show live, but we have signups, right, for the campfire, and sometimes we have to turn them off and pause for a month because we get so many submissions. We don't want to be scheduling people out 3-4 months where they're going to forget about it or something like that. So we have to turn them off. So yeah, I would say it's a little easier than it was at the beginning, definitely.
Yeah, just the change since the TV shows came out, and people seem to be a lot more forthcoming because you're not looked at the same crazy way 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think particularly with ghosts, it's become much more acceptable. I think it's tougher for people to have UFO sightings or cryptid sightings. I think those are still ostracized more so, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I think with ghost sightings, it's getting to the point where you can talk about it in quote polite company, because I think, the truth is, I think even if somebody's a skeptic, I think most people have had an experience they don't understand. Even a lot of times when I'll hear something like this, well, I don't believe in any of this stuff, but there was this one time, and then they'll go on to tell you the craziest paranormal story or potentially paranormal story. And so I think everybody has a story, and even those who you want to kind of fight against it, I think almost everybody has had something very strange happen to them.
Yeah, yeah. And I love books like this as well with the different stories, because it's not, because I get a lot of the times, because I host public ghost hunts and have throughout the years, and and even people ask me about going and investigating different places like Waverly Hills and all these big places. I always want to know about them, and they're always like, well, I couldn't do that, I'd be too scared, and they just think all of the paranormal is scary because you have the Conjuring movies and horror movies that are trumped up. But books like yours, you have lots of stories that are not scary. They're very heartwarming, and like loved ones coming back to visit and things like that. And I think those stories are awesome as well. I've had a few guests on that we've talked about. I had a Lynn Monet, who is she's a hospice nurse, and she came on and told a lot of heartwarming stories about loved ones reconnecting right before they die, and this whole process. And so I love those stories as well, to show people that a haunting doesn't have to be scary, or an experience doesn't have to be scary. Sometimes, a lot of the time, there are these amazing things that happen with passed on loved ones, or loved ones who are in the process of passing.
Yeah, we had one in the early days of Campfire. I think this is in one of the first books where this young woman, I think she was probably like 17, 18, something like that. She had worked at her parents' car dealership. They had like a Yeah, a car dealership. And she was there in the morning, and for some reason she found a monarch butterfly on the ground who was dying, and it made her extremely sad. She started crying. She was inconsolable. She couldn't figure out why. And her mom tried to comfort her. Her mom worked there too. So they were in the office or whatever, and they got a call that her grandfather was very, very ill. Maybe ready to pass at the hospital. They should get over there. So her mom went ahead and she closed everything down, and she didn't get to the hospital in time because she was just a few minutes behind her mom, but it wasn't in time that her grandpa passed. So anyway, after all this happened, she's distraught. She's just very upset. And she drives back to the family house, and she's there, and people are already starting to come and bring food because this was in the South, and that's what people do. And she stayed in her room while she couldn't deal with it. She said, "I'm going out for a drive." So she starts driving, and then she said she drove to a place she had never been before. It was like a park. And she didn't know why she drove there. And she'd never been there before. And I think after the fact, she wasn't even sure where it was at or how she would get back there. And she went and sat on a bench. And all of a sudden, a whole flock, I don't know, maybe 20 monarch butterflies came around her. Wow. And were in her hair and on her and all these things. And she took that as a sign from her grandpa, and it tied in with what happened earlier in the day, the monarch butterfly that had passed. But the thing is that I think that our loved ones have the ability to get signs to us.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're things that wouldn't mean anything to anybody else, but they mean something to us. I had an experience like that. In 2017, I was on a paranormal themed cruise, and there were multiple speakers. I was one of them. And anyway, the day I was speaking, this is pre-COVID and all that, but I had a cold and had a little bit of a sore throat. So before I was going to go speak, I went to the little cafe on the ship and got some coffee. And to do that, to get back to the conference room, I had to walk through the casino. And there was one of those crane games where the claw goes down and grabs money.
Yeah.
And one of our attendees was playing it. Now that made a real impression on me, and I kind of stopped in my tracks because my late uncle, who had passed a few years earlier, who was like a second dad to me, loved those games. He would play those games all the time at places like Walmart or CVS, wherever they would have them where he could get the stuffed toys. Plus, he liked to do like low stakes gambling, like football pools and stuff like that, or the lotto tickets or scratch offs or whatever. Said he would love this. Not only does he have his beloved crane game, but he could play for cash. He would go crazy for this. I wish he were here. And no sooner I had that thought, a woman walks up next to the machine, cups her hand to her mouth and says, "John, John." My uncle's name was John.
Wow.
And then her husband or whoever it was walked over to her. Now, again, the skeptic would say, well, this was just a bunch of coincidences. But man, what a coincidence.
Yeah.
His name could have been Bill. It could have been Steve. It could have been Eric. It could have been Jim. It could have been, whatever. But it was John. And that falls into the old, what I call too much of a coincidence to be a coincidence.
Yeah.
To me, that was my uncle saying, hey, you're thinking of me and I am around. I might not be able to play the crane game, but I am here. And all the different things that had to happen for me to be in that place when that woman said that.
Right.
And on her end, she had to lose track of her spouse or whoever he was. So, I mean, it just was... it was a remarkable experience for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had something similar. We rescued a dog from a puppy mill, and he was a short-haired Jack Russell, and we had him for about 10 years, and he ended up getting prostate cancer, and we had to put him down. And so we were really upset, because we were in there when they put him down, and we were really upset, and we had him cremated and all that. So they took him. And so when we were leaving the vet's office, we decided to go shopping. Or just go window shopping, not really shopping, just window shopping. We thought, maybe our other dogs will get them some treats, new beds, something, because, their brother's gone now. And so we just randomly picked the store that we went in Nashville. And we're back looking at all the dog beds and treats and toys and picking out some for our dogs. And we hear over the intercom, Chase, will you come to the front, please? Chase to the front, where our dog's name was Chase.
Yeah.
And so, like you're saying, the coincidences and things to go into us picking that particular store out of the thousands of stores in Nashville. And just so happens there's a kid named Chase who's being called from the back to the front over the intercom system in the 10 minutes that we were in the store. It's just beyond, any kind of coincidence.
Exactly. That's one of the best corollaries to that story I have that I've ever heard. And I think from the beyond, sometimes, maybe not all the time, they have the ability to move things like chess pieces and make those kind of things line up. I've also heard, and I just had this yesterday, it hasn't even aired on the show yet. Somebody called in and said that it was a dream, and I think the dream was about her grandma. And her grandma had passed, and her grandma had a very special message she wanted to get to her son, our caller's father. And anyway, the ghost in the call who called on the phone said, I don't have very much time. And I've heard that over and over, that people say when there is some kind of contact, whether it's a dream or a voice or whatever it is, a lot of times the person on the other side, the quote ghost, will make it clear they have a very limited time. So that almost tells me that it's not easy, or it's not, that's why they just don't show up and say, hey, but I think they do say, hey, just in a different way. And that's what happened with Chase. And I think that's what happened with my uncle.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you have people talk about pennies. I've known some people tell me stories about finding pennies with certain years on them, or even other coins. They always find them with 1976. And that's that's a sign. Ooh, you just gave me chills. I got to tell you what happened to me yesterday, literally. And you said 1976. Wow. This may be a sign in itself. Get this. So I was recording, when we record campfire calls, we might do 8 or 10 in like one session in one day. So I don't tell people call if you've got this kind of story, we just say call on these days. Yeah.
Or we give them choices on the calendar, pick your time, but we don't say only UFO calls this day, only ghost stories this day. It's whatever. But a lot of times what'll happen is I say the show produces itself, and in one day we'll get several calls on the same theme. And yesterday I was getting calls on signs from loved ones who passed. Well, the funny thing is that I just finished the session. I went downstairs because my studio is upstairs. Went downstairs to get some water or something. And right in the middle in our foyer, we have our foyer, if you're fancy. We had a large carpet, one of those ornate kind of carpets.
Yeah.
It's not the real thing. We couldn't afford the real thing. I think we got it from Costco. Anyway, the point is, right in the middle is a quarter. And it's flipped off to the reverse side, not the side with Washington, the other. And it was a bicentennial corner from 1976. And my uncle, again, was a big coin collector. And one of his big things was he collected anytime somebody had a bicentennial quarter from 1976, which you mentioned without us setting this before.
Yeah.
He would collect it. Now, this morning I asked my daughter, as I said, does anybody have quarters? And she said, yeah, I had some quarters in my book bag. And we kind of blew it off and thought, oh, well, it's just probably just a coincidence. And then now you said 1976. So I'm like, okay, is that a sign? Maybe.
Yeah, it could be for sure. Like I said, I just love those stories because I get so much of people saying they're scared of the paranormal, they're scared to have an experience, but it intrigues them. They listen to our shows and it intrigues them. They want to come out on Public Ghost Hunts and things, but I just love those shows, those stories about things like that, the connections and that we have with the dead that we don't understand, and when they come back and visit. I've had quite a few dreams as well where that were very lucid, more than dreaming where I knew I was dreaming, where I've had loved ones coming back and visit me, and I've heard people tell those stories as well. To me, they're very comforting.
We had one in this book. We called it A Paranormal Message, and it was about Chris and his wife Susan. They had an organic pear farm, And unfortunately, she passed. She was riding horseback, and she was the horse must have gotten freaked out or something and threw her, and she passed away. So anyway, he was very, very sad. Chris was.
Yeah.
But he would find himself in these different situations where she would give him a sign. He was he was doing this kind of poetry thing. And in the back room, after she came up, somebody with the organization he's with said, "Hey, there's a basket back there full of pears." And he thought it was maybe somebody's idea of a sick joke. And then he looked at it, and there was a card, typewritten card, "Eat a pear." And his wife would always tell him, "Eat a pear," like to be healthy.
Yeah.
Would always tell him that. So anyway, then he was at another place. He was at a church. I think he was singing in the choir or something. And again, I don't have the story in front of me, so I hope I'm getting the details right. Same thing. Lady comes to him and says, "Somebody left something for you in the back. It's a basket of pears." And he went and saw, same thing. "No, eat a pear." And he'd never eat them because he thought it was somebody's idea of a sick joke. Finally, he's at home one night to get a can of Coke. He's sitting with his dog. Now, he said the dog, he always kind of had a kind of love-hate relationship with the dog. The dog really belonged to Susan. I mean, he didn't hate the dog, but it wasn't a smooth relationship sometimes.
Right.
And he's sitting drinking a Coke, eating some chips or somewhere, and they're watching TV, him and the dog. And the dog goes over to the refrigerator and goes like apoplectic. He goes crazy, like he wants something from the refrigerator. Chris opens the refrigerator. What's there? A bunch of pears, and it says, "Eat a pear." And then at that point, he got it, because that dog loves Susan.
Yeah.
And nobody could have gotten in his house. He knew that Susan was leaving that note for him, "Eat a pear," and leaving pears for him. And that's why I love the name of that one, A Paranormal Message.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. The portation of spirits, like hiding people's keys and things, and they found them in the freezer and things like that.
Yeah.
So
we did a show on that. We did a show on that with a woman who wrote a book called Jott, Jott, just one of those things. And unfortunately, she's passed. I think she was quite elderly when we interviewed her, I think before the pandemic. I'm not exactly sure when. Her name was Mary Rose Barrington. She talked about how things go. They disappear and they come up at very unusual places. So that's it. But I mean, it's not all sweetness and light. We have our first story in the book is called "The Devil is Real," about a young woman playing with a Ouija board. So we really did try to mix it up and try to give a good kind of cross section of the kind of stories that we have.
Yeah. What are some of the top stories that you would recommend people to kind of share with their families and friends this summer?
Well, I think the Roadhouse Saloon is always a good one. The Devil is Real. I'll tell that one. This is a good one. It's kind of short, but it's kind of wild. So Mariah and her friend Molly, they were kind of, I gather, maybe 14 or 15 years old, and they used to get together over this summer every night and play the Ouija board. And they had read somewhere that it was disrespectful to put the Ouija board on the floor. So this particular time, I don't know if it was a spare room or something, there was this broken unplugged guitar amp. So they decided to sit the Ouija board on that. Now, they would ask for different spirits to come through, but almost every time they would get one named Gail. And Gail seemed harmless and there was no problem. But one night, when they're asking for a spirit, they're doing a thing with the planchette, and the planchette stopped moving, and the room got very still and spooky. You know when a room feels weird. That's what Mariah said happened here. They have this Ouija board on this guitar amp, and then they said suddenly the amp clicked on by itself and starting making sounds like an old radio tuner trying to find a station. Now think about this. It's a broken amp, and it's unplugged, and yet it turns on. And it's not the first time we've heard of something like that on the shows. This unplugged amp, from it emanated a voice. It sounded like a Southern preacher. And he said, "The devil is real," before the amp audibly clicked itself off. Mariah and Molly ran out of the room in terror, with Mariah never using a Ouija board in the same location again. I think if it had been me, I would not have used it at all after that.
Yeah.
And then I also wonder how much of this is also a trickster element. I think there's a trickster element to the paranormal. Now, I do think there is evil. I mean, some people will say, I don't believe there's evil. I think it's just a lower vibration. I think there's good, but I also think there's evil. And maybe they tapped into it that evening. There's some other really interesting stories here. We have a great time slip story called The Mysterious Mrs. Raspberry, the creepy crawly thing about a weird crawling thing that one of our callers saw at work at a paper mill, and kind of a sad story behind it. And one called this one the strangest school day ever, about a guy who's telling a story about the 1970s, about a very strange school day, which is almost kind of a, like, what were there experiments going on, or just kind of weird things. So I think there's a lot of good stories to choose from in the book.
Yeah. Like I said, I need to check this one out. I've checked out the first few. I need to get back into reading. I've been really busy lately, but I need to get back into reading. But all the books are available on Amazon Kindle, on your website. And of course the podcasts are everywhere. If you're listening to this show, you can definitely find it.
Absolutely. The easiest way to find the book, if you just want to go to jimharold.com, JIMHAROLD.com, there's a big green button at the top of the page. You click on that. That'll give you all the links. It's available at Amazon.com, BarnesNoble.com, all the major players. You can certainly search directly at those places as well. You'll find them there. But if you want one place, and that goes for both the Kindle ebook, just the Nook ebook, or the paperback, depending if you like the Dead Tree version or not. And then for the podcasts, you can find Jim Harold's Campfire and the Paranormal Podcast wherever you listen to this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of the different podcast apps out there. And we'd love to have you listen and maybe submit your own story. We have a good time with it. I always lead people to the Jim Harold's Campfire first. I think that's the show that most people gravitate to if you like spooky stories.
Yeah. I definitely listen whenever I get a chance to both shows, and am definitely a fan of both of them as well. Thank you so much, Jim, for coming on the show today. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, Eric, I got to say, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for allowing me to come on and talk spooky stuff with you and your great audience. And I wish you all the best, and stay spooky.
All right, everybody. Y'all have a safe day. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to The Unseen Paranormal. Join me next Wednesday with a brand new guest. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. This helps more people discover the show. You can connect with me over on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or join us in the Unseen Paranormal Lounge group on Facebook. Until next time, remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.
You have come to the end of the line. Whoa.